An argument from authority is an argument in which the conclusion is supported by, surprisingly enough, citing an authority. Since the argument is based on an appeal to authority, the strength of the support depends on the quality of the authority. Given that no one can be an expert on everything, and the fact that people regularly need reliable information, these arguments are very common. In fact, they are used so often that people generally do not even realize they're being used. For example, when a politician cites an economist to justify her policies, she's making an argument from authority. As another example, when a student cites a source in a history paper stating that a historic event took place, he is using an argument from authority. As a final example, when people trust a news source, such as CNN, The Daily Show, or Fox News, they're probably relying on an implicit argument from authority. They assume the news source should be trusted because the people involved are supposed to be experts. Not surprisingly, this argument is generally used when a person lacks the required knowledge and expertise and therefore needs to rely on another source of information. For example, most lawyers are not experts on DNA testing or ballistics, so they hire experts to testify in court. In effect, they are saying that what the expert says about the DNA or the ballistics is true because the expert is, well, an expert. This sort of argument is also used when a person wants to add extra weight to his or her position. For example, an author on a book of dieting might cite other doctors and nutritional experts that agree with her views on dieting. Like other arguments, an argument from authority can be used to establish its conclusion for use as a premise in another argument. For example, a person who is arguing for the censorship of violence in video games or movies might cite an authority who claims that watching violent television makes children violent, or playing video games makes people violent. It should be noted that an argument from authority is not an exceptionally strong argument. After all, in such cases, a claim is being accepted as true simply because a person is asserting that it is true. The person may be an expert, but her expertise does not really bear on the actual truth or falsity of the claim. This is because the expertise of a person does not actually determine whether the claim is true or false. Hence, arguments that deal directly with the evidence relating to the claim itself will tend to be stronger. Despite the inherent weakness in this argument, a person who is a legitimate expert is more likely to be right than wrong when making claims within her area of expertise. In a sense, the claim is being accepted because it's reasonable to believe that the expert has tested the claim and found it to be reliable. So, if the expert has found it to be reliable, then it is reasonable to accept it as being true. Thus, the listener is accepting a claim based on the testimony of an expert. Naturally, the main challenge is determining whether the person in question is a legitimate expert or not. Now, turning now to the form of the argument. Although people generally present arguments from authority in a fairly informal manner, the argument itself has the following logical form. Premise 1 is the establishment of authority. So premise 1, person A is an authority on subject S. Premise 2 establishes the person makes the claim. So premise 2, person A makes claim C about subject S. Then the conclusion is, of course, therefore the claim is true. For example, premise 1, Dr. LaBossiere is an authority on arguments. Premise 2, Dr. LaBossiere claims that an argument can have only a single conclusion. The conclusion of the argument, therefore it is true that an argument can have only a single conclusion. Now, how does one tell whether an argument from authority is a good argument or not? Well, this becomes a matter of the standards for the argument from authority, the assessment. An argument from authority is assessed in terms of 6 standards. If an argument meets these standards, then it is an acceptable argument from authority, and it is reasonable to accept the conclusion based on the premises. If an argument fails to meet the standards, then it would not be reasonable to accept the conclusion based on the premises. Bad arguments from authority are relatively common and are actually known as fallacious appeals to authority. And they are, of course, fallacies, mistakes in reasoning. Now here's how you sort out a good argument from authority from a bad one. The first standard is this: the person has sufficient expertise in the subject matter in question. Claims made by a person who lacks the needed degree of expertise to make a reliable claim will, obviously enough, not be well supported. In contrast, claims made by a person with a needed degree of expertise will be supported by the person's reliability in the area. Determining whether or not a person has the needed degree of expertise can often be very difficult. In academic fields, such as philosophy, engineering, history, etc., the person's formal education, academic performance, publication, membership in professional societies, papers presented, awards won, and so forth can all be reliable indicators of expertise. Outside of academic fields, other standards will apply. For example, having sufficient expertise to make a reliable claim about how to tie a shoelace only requires the ability to actually tie a shoelace and impart this information to others. It should be noted that being an expert does not always require having a university degree or a certificate. Many people have high degrees of expertise in sophisticated subjects without ever having attended a university to take classes in that subject. And of course, it should not be simply assumed that a person with a degree is automatically an expert. Of course, what is required to be an expert is often a matter of great debate. For example, some people have claimed expertise in a certain area because of divine inspiration or a special gift. The followers of such people accept such credentials as establishing the person's expertise, while others often see these self-proclaimed experts as deluded or even as charlatans. In other cases, people debate over what sort of education and experience is needed to legitimately be an expert. Thus, one person may take to be a fallacious appeal, another person may take to be a perfectly good appeal to authority. Fortunately, some cases do not involve such debate about the standards. So the first standard is, of course, the person's got to have a sufficient degree of expertise in the subject. The second standard is this: the claim being made by the person is within her area or areas of expertise. If a person makes a claim about a subject outside of his or her areas of expertise, then the person is not an expert in that context. Hence, the claim in question is not backed by the required degree of expertise, and thus is not reliable based on this appeal to authority. It is very important to remember that because of the vast scope of human knowledge and skill, it is simply not possible for one person to be an expert on everything. Hence, experts will only be true experts in respect to certain subject areas. In most other areas, they will have little or no expertise. Thus, it is important to determine what subject area a claim falls under. It is also important to note that expertise in one area does not automatically confer expertise in another. For example, being an expert in physics does not automatically make a person an expert on morality or politics. Unfortunately, this is often overlooked or even intentionally ignored. In fact, much of advertising rests on a violation of this condition. As anyone who watches television or views the YouTube videos knows, it's extremely common to get a famous actor or sports hero to endorse products they're really not especially qualified to assess. For example, a person may be a great actor, but that doesn't make them an expert on cars or shaving or underwear, or diets, or politics. And so that condition of standard assessment is also important. A third important condition is that there is an adequate degree of agreement among other experts in the subject in question. If there is a significant amount of legitimate dispute among the experts within a subject, then it will be fallacious to make an argument from authority using the disputing experts. This is because for almost any claim being made and supported by one expert, there'll be a counterclaim that is made and supported by another expert. In such cases, appealing to the authorities would tend to be futile. After all, the dispute has to be settled by consideration of the actual issue under dispute. Since the various sides in such a dispute can invoke experts, the dispute cannot be rationally settled by an argument from authority, in general, assuming equally competent and capable authorities disagree. Now, there are many fields in which there is a significant amount of legitimate dispute. Economics is an excellent example of such a disputed field. Anyone who's even vaguely familiar with economics knows there are many plausible theories that tend to be incompatible with one another. Because of this, one expert economist could sincerely claim that the deficit is a key factor in the state of the national economy, while another equally eminently qualified economist could assert the exact opposite. Another area where dispute is very common and well known is in the areas of psychology and psychiatry. As has been demonstrated in various trials, it is possible to find one expert that will assert that an individual is insane and non-competent to stand trial. And of course, it's easy to find another qualified expert who will testify under oath that the same individual is both sane and competent to stand trial. Obviously, one cannot rely on these authorities in such a situation without making a fallacious argument. Such an argument would be fallacious, since the evidence would not warrant accepting the conclusion. It's important to keep in mind that no field has complete agreement, so some degree of dispute is acceptable. How much is acceptable is, of course, a matter of serious debate. It is also important to keep in mind that even a field with a great deal of internal dispute might contain areas of significant agreement. In such cases, an argument from authority could be legitimate. Another factor to take into account is whether or not the person in question is significantly biased or not. In order for it to be a good argument, the expert must be not significantly biased. If an expert is significantly biased, then the claims he makes within his area of bias will be less reliable. Since a bias expert will not be reliable, an argument from authority based on a bias expert will be fallacious. This is because the evidence will not justify accepting the claim. Experts, being people, are vulnerable to biases and prejudices just like everyone else. If there is evidence that a person is biased in some manner that would affect the reliability of her claims, then an argument from authority based on that person is likely to be fallacious. Even if the claim is actually true, the fact that the expert is biased weakens the argument. This is because there would be reason to believe that the expert might not be making the claim because she has carefully considered it using her expertise. Rather, there would be reason to believe that the claim is being made because of the expert's bias or prejudice. It is important to remember that no person is completely objective. At the very least, a person will be favorable towards her own views. Otherwise, obviously, she wouldn't hold them. Because of this, some degree of bias must be accepted, provided that the bias is not significant. What counts as a significant degree of bias is open to dispute and can vary a great deal from case to case. For example, many people would probably suspect that doctors who are paid by tobacco companies to research the effects of smoking would be biased, while others might claim they would be able to remain objective. Another standard, the next to last one, is that the area of expertise has got to be a legitimate area or discipline. Certain areas in which a person may claim expertise may have no legitimacy or validity as areas of knowledge or study. Obviously, claims made in such areas will not be reliable. What counts as a legitimate area of expertise is sometimes difficult to determine. However, there are cases which are fairly clear-cut. For example, if a person claimed to be an expert at something he called chroma bullet therapy and asserted that firing colorfully painted rifle bullets at a person would cure cancer, it would not be very reasonable to accept his claim based on his alleged expertise. After all, his expertise is in an area which seems to be devoid of legitimate content. The general idea is that to be a legitimate expert, a person must have mastery over a real field or area of knowledge. As noted above, determining the legitimacy of a field can often be difficult. In European history, various scientists had to struggle with the church and established traditions to establish the validity of their disciplines. For example, experts on evolution faced an uphill battle in getting the legitimacy of their area accepted. An interesting reversal, those who advocate intelligent design now face rejection by many authorities in science. A modern example involves psychic phenomena. Some people, for example, claim they are certified master psychics and are expert in the field. Other people contend that their claims of being certified master psychics are simply absurd, since there is no real content to such an area of alleged expertise. If these people are right, then anyone who accepts the claims of these master psychics are victims of a fallacious appeal to authority. The last standard is this: the authority in question must be identified. A common variation of the typical fallacious appeal to authority is an appeal to an unnamed authority. This fallacy is also known as an appeal to an unidentified authority. That fallacy is committed when a person asserts that a claim is true because an expert or authority makes the claim, and the person doesn't actually identify the expert. Since the expert is not named or identified, there is no way to tell if the person is actually an expert. Unless the person is identified and has his or her expertise established, there is no reason to accept the claim. This sort of bad reasoning is actually fairly common. Typically, the person making that sort of bad argument will say things like, "I have a book that says," or "they say," or "the experts say," or "scientists believe that," or "I read it in the paper," or "I saw on TV," or some similar statement. In such a case, the person is often hoping that the listener will simply accept the identified source as a legitimate authority and believe the claim being made. If a person accepts the claim simply because they accept the unidentified source as an expert, without good reason to do so, they've fallen prey to this fallacy. Now, obviously, the main reason why we're looking at arguments from authority is in regards to their potential use in moral argumentation. And here's how to employ one in moral argumentation. An argument from authority can be used to support a concept or factual claim that is being used in a moral argument. For example, suppose that an argument is being presented against capital punishment on the basis that it allegedly does not deter crimes. In order to support this factual claim, qualified experts could be cited in its defense. As another example, suppose that an argument is given in which it is argued that capital punishment is morally acceptable because it has the beneficial consequence of reducing crimes. In this case, an argument from authority could be presented by citing qualified experts on this matter. Not surprisingly, experts can often be found either side of almost any controversial issue. Now, one variation on the argument from authority is what could be called the argument from moral authority. It works exactly like a normal argument from authority, except the expert is specifically an expert on morality. And the conclusion is that the expert's claim regarding a moral issue is true because of this expertise. It would look pretty much like the standard form with slight variation. So premise 1 would be A is an authority on morality. Premise 2, A makes claim C about a moral issue. Conclusion, therefore claim C is true. So the idea is basically their claim about morality is correct because they're an expert. To use a concrete example, premise 1, Kant is a noted moral philosopher and an expert on morality. Premise 2, Kant claims that suicide is morally wrong. Conclusion, therefore suicide is wrong. Now, obviously one point of concern about arguments for moral authority is you can pretty much always find an equal authority that says exactly the opposite. For example, premise 1, David Hume is a noted moral philosopher and an expert on morality. Premise 2, David Hume claims that suicide is morally acceptable. Conclusion, therefore suicide is morally acceptable. While this line of reasoning is legitimate, it suffers from a general flaw that I've mentioned. There is so much disagreement among moral authorities that appealing to any one of them to settle a dispute is a rather weak line of reasoning. Naturally, if one moral authority could be shown to be conclusively superior to all others, then arguments based on the authority of this source would be stronger than arguments from other moral authorities. As a final note, people often attempt to make moral arguments based on what is stated by a legal or religious authority. For example, someone might cite the Bible when making a moral argument against same-sex marriage or against capital punishment. As another example, someone might cite the Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution when making a moral argument against censorship of the arts. However, going from religion or law to ethics requires some special reasoning that is discussed in a method we'll look at later, known as mixing norms. While people are often convinced by appeals to moral, religious, or legal authorities that share their views, it should always be kept in mind that this is a rather weak method of argumentation. And this brings us to the end of the 3 general inductive methods, and we'll proceed to looking at more particular methods that can be useful in moral argumentation.